3 people on all the committees. So our guests today are Alec Deary from Grid Architects from Annapolis, Ralph Bennett, Professor Emeritus from this institution, as well as Bennett Frank McCarthy Architects, Marissa Gomez Allen from Twin Evans, Chad Williams, Craig Williams from David Schwartz. He's replacing Ted Housenet, who is going to come and is not coming. And then Steve Muse from his own firm in Bethesda.
Awesome.
And we're going to be joined by Mide Akasati when he arrives in a few minutes. The key professor, Michael Marshall, will be joining us this afternoon. He's unavailable this morning. So as I said, we're going to be seeing 8 projects, and these students have worked incredibly hard for this semester, as well as last semester. They did their pro-thesis documents, their research, and what you're going to see today is the product of 4 months of intense architectural design. And to take it away, Brandon is our first, Brandon Bridge, and he's going to take us into Washington for some housing down by train station.
Okay, thanks. Good morning, everyone. Before I get started, I'd like to thank the people that have made this process possible, starting with the chair of my committee, Professor Noonan. Thanks again for all your wisdom and your patience along the way as I've gone through this. And of course, Professor Dupuy for being harsh when he needs to be, but also a great help at any waking hour that we need him. Sometimes he's here even more than we are. And with that, we'll get started. Building wellness, reimagining space, and shaping urban lifestyle. Is there a, I need a clicker?
I'll go find this one.
Just now thought.
In the meantime, can you click on the mouse? Yeah. Or the keyboard?
Okay, here we go. So this thesis is looking to challenge high-density housing, more so in city developments, to challenge it and put more of an emphasis on wellness rather than just profitability from developers, building performance, putting wellness at the highest end of the spectrum when it comes to residential housing as well as mixed-use programming. So just as an overview, we're going to start with the origins of wellness, some of the theory and philosophy of wellness itself, setting the tone for what we understand as wellness today, and then comparing the theory of yesterday with the science, the proof of what wellness is and how it functions with us today. Then from that, we can translate wellness into space and how the environment affects our wellness on a daily, on a moment's basis from time to time, and then how that space is used within certain kinds of development to influence activity and other options that are going on, and then ultimately the solution to this debate. So looking at the theory, again, wellness has been something that's been discussed for hundreds, even thousands of years. A little small, but you can see some well-known philosophers that have been praised over the years: Confucius, Plato, Aristotle. Wellness wasn't always a term that was commonly used in the past. It was more so about being happy or living the good life. So that theory translates into today and what it means to actually be well and have a happy and healthy lifestyle. So over the years, the philosophies have changed. It ultimately was focused around achieving the good life. And then as the years do go on, some other key factors come into play, like religion, looking at the importance of wellness, having that prominence or greater being in your life. And then a little more recently, psychology has taken off and of course really focused on the mental health wellness as a whole. And then, like I said, getting into science and sustainability, there's some science to prove these factors, as well as sustainability that is very common within development today. So looking at the science aspect, I think it can boil down to one major aspect called the circadian rhythm. So really this is the internal clock of your body, of your system. Sometimes it's hard to be aware of because it's really a subconscious factor of your body. It's the cycle that cycles you through alertness levels and sleepiness levels so you can recuperate every night and then start over again the next day. So again, there's a lot of time slots here. You can start to imagine how you could plan out some of your day based on these factors. Fastest reaction time, greatest cardiovascular efficiency at certain times throughout the evening or the day, how you could start to plan your activity or your wellness based on some of these natural processes that are going on within your body at every moment. So then, looking at the philosophy, translating that into the science, now taking that into spaces themselves and how we interact, how those spaces interact with us. So many types of spaces are there? I think it can be pretty simple. We could start with a living space. These are your dwelling units, these are your bedrooms, these are your apartments, where you're doing most of your residing as you make it through day-to-day life. Another one could be working. So almost all of us go to work every day or on a regular basis. What do these spaces comprise of? How are they different than living spaces? Is there much of a difference? Or can there be some sort of balance between the two? So from there, what's another kind of space? I think it can be characterized as just everything else. It can be leisure space, it can be play space, or it could be characterized as wellness space. So as we look at these, it's really looking at the spaces more of a Venn diagram than separate entities. How these spaces can start to mend and mesh together and ultimately perform more happiness for individuals. So looking at the types of spaces and the activities that are going on within these spaces, again, sticking to the color code with the yellow being housing, the red being, or living rather, the red being more of the workspace, and then the green being the open, free time space of wellness spaces. So again, if these start to mend together, maybe you are having fun or you're being well at work. Maybe you're working from home with your family. Maybe you're having your friends over at your house and also having these activities go on and ultimately being happy and having a high state of well-being between these spaces. So again, live, work, and be well. So from there, it's looking at 3 different kinds of spaces. And when I think of development and 3 different kinds of spaces, 3 different types of program, lead me to mixed use development. So that led me to the NOMA district, known as North of Massachusetts Ave in Washington, D.C. The site I was looking at is right here, adjacent to the Union Station tracks to the east and northeast from the main hub of Washington, D.C. The site itself has several, or I guess a few different challenges. As of right now, it's just a big parking lot with a steep bank along the south end of L Street. And again, having the close proximity to the log tracks that are right next door. Office building to the north with a bunch of other buildings also to the north that are anywhere from mixed-use residential to just office, retail, really a good mix. And what's interesting about this area is, well, if you want to look at it as being interesting, is that many of these buildings are really the same. It's hard to tell which ones are office, which ones are housing. They're all very uniform in their appearance. And that is mainly because of the challenges of the area itself. in Washington, D.C., there's a height restriction at about 130 feet tall. So this really limits what you can do in terms of program and massing for the building, as well as the very high density in the area. Again, that's a hard limit to fight with when you're building up and trying to maximize density within the development. So breaking the neighborhood down into a smaller scale, looking at it in its simplest form and figure ground, starting to get an idea of the different uniformity of the area, of the neighborhood itself. So we're looking into this area right here. You can see really the oddity is the Union Station tracks that are cutting right through the middle of the site, and how that is starting to influence some of the building forms along that hard edge that is cutting diagonally into the site itself. From there, in terms of wellness, thinking about services and amenities that are in the immediate neighborhood. So again, many building codes, building performance systems are considered when it comes to wellness or just sustainability as a whole. LEED, a very common program that we're all familiar with. When they have a sustainable sites credit, and they are really focusing on the connection to services and specific amenities within a walking distance of your building or your site itself. So some of these can include medical offices, fitness centers, libraries, all of these things that are within the area. So looking into the neighborhood itself, it's an expansive area with a lot to offer. From there, we can pinpoint these different locations and then look at the walking distance from the site to those spaces. If we see an overlap of these radiuses, we can see that is a common spot or a hub for interaction and for movement between these services and amenities that are desired. So the approach to the site, just starting from the basics, locating the site itself, defining the parameters of the site, then identifying the primary street to develop upon, this being L Street that cuts underneath the Union Station tracks. Establishing, starting out with a base to engage the community itself. Then determining how we want to orient the building to maximize lighting, open space, access, all of these things, really just an arbitrary form. Then dividing that into more realistic bars in terms of housing, in this case breaking it up into 4, orienting the bars on the north to south axis to maximize sun throughout all times of the day, coming from the east through the south and over to the west. So hitting all the facades at different points of the day. Then embracing the urban fabric itself, turning one of the bars to really take on the form of some of these buildings and the edge of Union Station. Then constructing a core to these buildings, which is really going to act as the urban core and house many of these spaces that are going on within this development. Again, activating a small change, cutting away with some of this space so you can activate the street level for individuals. Inserting a courtyard that again goes right from the street level up into the urban core, the wellness core. And then integrating more wellness spaces on and above the development itself. So looking at the site again, the overall site, again, it was a steep embankment along the south and then a very expansive parking lot that was fully paved. So maximizing the whole block, as you will, from the intersection of First Ave and L Street all the way over to Union Station, and then getting into the different spaces through the floor plans of how this can be accessed. So the first floor plan by color, we're looking at, also right behind me here, we're looking at the retail in the lightish red, pinkish color along the south end, bringing individuals in. We have these straight stretches that are cutting right through, accessed by the residents, so people that are living in the development can come in right through these doors and go right up to the vertical circulation in the back, the core of the building. And then behind the retail, we have service areas that cut across the middle of the building. And then in between all the green are these wellness spaces that are integrated not only outside of the building, but within the building as well. So having a pool that steps down from the first floor to the -1 level, and then having these other spaces along these long halls as individuals are coming in so they can interact with each other, engage in different activities as they're getting to their spaces. And again, the blue being the main circulation through the building, both from north to south and east to west. Looking at the housing itself, this is a typical floor plan. There's a lot to look at here. Really just focusing on this being one floor, from that first dotted line over to the right. Looking at these 4 major bars as a whole, you'll see the different variation of room types in terms of the amount of bedrooms, and really focusing on this same circulation path that is cutting all the way through the bars and into the wellness core that was developed. So here you'll see a floor of a fitness center, and then the circulation is cutting right through, no direct access into the gym, but again, having that wellness space being housed as individuals are coming from place to place. So when it comes to wellness, talked about the circadian rhythm, that's one aspect that's greatly influenced by light and air. Of course, we're all familiar with how important that can be. So looking at the variation of these room types ranging from 1 bedroom, micro, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, as well as 2-story and flats. So you'll see it in the double loaded corridor. It's a different experience as you're looking into, one side's looking into these more private courtyards, and then one into the wellness courtyard, which we'll get into a little more later. As well as the single loaded corridors or bars that have also 2 stories. They could be flats, they could be multi-story, looking into both into the city, over to the street, and then into the individual courtyards as well. So from there, I'm going to direct you to the boards to look at the other plans. This was the 3rd floor plan. Again, this is really going to be housing. This is really that 2nd level that's engaging the public. You'll see these courtyards that I was alluding to in between these bars here, having more of this interactive space with office spaces housed on this 3rd story, and then really this main access point of the public getting into the fitness center right from the bottom of the wellness courtyard, right in the middle or the core of the building. And again, you'll see on all these floors, keeping that circulation consistent as it cuts all the way through from the east to west. And then from there, getting over to the roof plan, we'll get into more of the actual individual services, amenities of the wellness spaces as we go along here. You can start to see some of these spaces house tennis court, a volleyball court that would be enclosed, a pool that cantilevers over the rock climbing wall from the roof that can all be accessed from the residents, and then more privately, not privately, but publicly through the wellness core as they're moving up into these individual spaces. So again, to look at some of these spaces, I like to think of it in sequence, to have all these different options as individuals are living just their regular lives. Say someone is coming home from work in the afternoon and they're just getting back to their unit, to their apartment, and all the things that they would see along the way. So coming down the street, you get a good view of the building itself. You can see the 4 different bars with all the retail engaged along the street. And then the wellness spaces that are within. There's a big sky track up on top of the building, as well as a rock climbing wall that's right in the center of the residential bars. And again, this can be accessed right from the street level. So then if someone was going, maybe after a day of work, they want to get back to their unit to make a choice on how they want to spend their night, they can go up through the vertical circulation and get into one of the courtyards to go to their unit. Again, seeing activity as they go from one place to another. Getting up to their unit themselves, they can step out onto their balcony and see, from any unit, you can see the sky track that wraps around the top of the building. So seeing the activity and then engaging within that if they so choose. From there, they want to go into the wellness core of the building itself. They can go up into the fitness center. There's a lot of different things going on here, like I said. Some of these bridges that connect the different residential bars that are cutting on the outside, connecting to the fitness center, as well as the rock climbing wall that's on the outside, housing more activity as individuals are passing through. Going up through the rest of the building, you can see onto the sky track. Now you can see down into all of the development, all of the activity that's going on within this small community that's housed in the building. And then from there, up onto the roof, looking at another amenity, another service, a track up on the roof itself. And then to close, looking at the building as a whole, again, this is right on the Union Station tracks. So looking at the building and what it means as a signifier of wellness and activity as you're coming and going throughout the city. So with that, I want to close with saying that this is a best practice approach. It's necessary in development. I think it's something that has been neglected for many years up to this point. And again, having this wellness incorporated in all this housing, this interaction of program can only help to influence individuals both in productivity, happiness, and health. And with that, I'd like to open it up for questions and comments.
Brendan, there's the glazed tower
Yeah.
between the slabs. It's expressed differently. Similarly, does that collective functions in it all the way up on every floor? What happens in there? Or is that more housing?
Where at?
In your wellness center, in that tower,
No housing in the corner.
so what's on all those different
What
levels?
goes in on it?
Different spaces. So it's a fitness center that climbs from different floors, so it's smaller stations. It's a smaller core because of the space that needs to be left in between for the residential units that are on the outside bars. So it can house different spaces like lounges, yoga rooms, fitness floors, different stations as you exceed up. And then as you get onto the roof, the 11th floor is really just changing rooms and more private as you get onto the pool on the top of the building.
So it's either the section here, it's all the different types of spaces that occur there. And they're collective spaces.
Yeah.
Common spaces. Also, for context, is the Capitol Crescent Trail right next to your building?
Yes.
Does that have any special access?
Yeah, right from the street, you can access it with stairs as you're coming right before you get to the underpass.
That's right, where?
It is right through here.
Can you, sorry, I can't see that. Can you point to?
This might be easier to see. It's right on this west end, right in between the tracks and the edge of the building.
Is this working? Yeah. Just feels strange talking on this.
You're good at it.
Okay, thanks. So I think that's the thing that is the most concerning to me is just how is the relationship to the different streets, like how you chose to orient it. For instance, you talked a lot about the L Street, relationship to the L Street, but the First Street relationship, which First Street is probably the most important street in Noma, there doesn't appear to be much thought about that. In fact, you've got this like single-loaded corridor with glass along here, and then on this side it's like the same facade as that, and then your wellness center's in the center, and I was kind of imagining this thing like rotating so that the wellness center literally connects to that crescent trail, and maybe it's more like a U-shaped building with the wellness center kind of backed up to that. And if it was U-shaped that way, then you would actually see up that surface from First Street, and you would see your rock climbing wall in the background. So I'm not trying to redesign it. It's just I've actually spent a lot of time in Noma. I worked there for a long time. And it just seems like the relationships are a little off. There's a lot of really
Okay.
interesting things going on with the scheme, but I'm concerned about the relationships to the streets, different streets.
Actually, I would like to redesign it. Certainly. My comments start off the exact same as yours. I think it really doesn't relate very well to the detail of the context. It's more of a geometric reply to the site, of starting off with a U-shaped building and then just cranking one of the wings based on the geometry of the train tracks. And I think the other thing I see when I look at your figure grounds is that this is really an edge between two very different neighborhoods. To the east, the scale changes quite a bit. And this is right at the point where that change happened. So I'm wondering what other site parties you looked at before you settled on this one.
We were going back and forth between orienting the bars or the buildings from east to west, north to south. I think for me it was really, I like these parties being oriented north to south for lighting. I wanted all of these bars to be completely open through the centers of the buildings, or the connection, the openings between the two bars. So if they were oriented in the opposite axis, worrying about light coming in from blocked facades or buildings that were in front. Yeah, but I think most of the parties range around these orientations.
Right, I do think there are other parties that hopefully you at least looked at. One being an L-shaped building that would wrap around the side and put the fitness center in that corner, where the housing units wouldn't have to face the tracks. I can't imagine that that's a great place to live. That might sort of loosen up the basic symmetry of the plan. Again, it's only deformed by that one wing that has changed. It also, it's funny, the way you describe the party, you went through a very additive process. You showed us a U-shaped building, then you cut the wings in half, and you put a ring on top. And I think the way the building plays out, it looks like an additive building. It looks like all these pieces don't yet really relate to each other. It's kind of neat to have this track on the roof, but it sort of looks like it landed there from some other place, as opposed to being, tied into the architecture of the rest of the building. Also, I think running around that track, while it might be kind of interesting, this past summer I was in the Acropolis Museum, which a lot of people love. I didn't like it. I didn't like it because on the top floor, every facade is glass, all the way around. And the Acropolis is on one side. And other views are really not very good. And why they didn't focus on the Acropolis and not focus on other things. So I'm imagining running around this thing, and I have to imagine at some point I see the Capitol. There's going to be one spot I get to where the Capitol's lined up, and that's where I want glass. And there'll be other places where I don't want any glass. So there might be a way that as you run through this thing, views are opening up and views are closing. The example that I would suggest that you look at for that is the High Line in New York. It is an amazing piece of architecture that works its way through, the city in a way that's really, really clever. It doesn't just get you from point A to point B, but the way it changes along the way to open up views. And when you get to see the water, they put a water feature there. And it's really specifically designed all the way through, based on how it's laid out. So I would suggest you look at that. The other thing is, if I had $1 for every time you said the word wellness, I could retire today. Because clearly that's what the project is about. And I think it's about that, the emphasis was on that much more so than the housing itself. I don't really see anything about the housing itself that talks about the issue of wellness. You put that graphic up there about the cycles of the day, which, by the way, that's true. I'm totally screwed up because my body doesn't relate to those cycles of the day. But if that is true, maybe that relates to the housing. Maybe it relates to the bedrooms are oriented a certain way based on the time that's best to sleep, or the living spaces are oriented a certain way based on time that people eat dinner or whatever. There might be something about those two things. And there might be something about the layout of the housing units themselves. Maybe they are not flats. Maybe they are multi-level units. So to get to my bedroom, I have to use the stair. Yeah, but why not do the whole thing that way? Why not really deform the section of this thing? When I look at these sections. I'm looking for something where the units are really terrific. They're forcing me to go up and down and get to different rooms within it. So I just think there's a way of, tying all these things together that I think could be better.
Okay.
Well, there's a lot here and a lot to comment on, and I've got all kinds of scattered comments that, it's hard to know where to start. I worked on a site about a block and a half northwest of here, so I am familiar with the neighborhood. And when you started out by saying that, you couldn't tell the office buildings from the apartment buildings, et cetera, in the neighborhood, you're right. I mean, Noma, unfortunately, is becoming a quick developing wasteland of mediocre or worse buildings. And I thought you were going to really hit on something and do something really different. And you're familiar with the First and M residential building, which has 5 or 6 different kinds of facade materials, and you've done the same thing. And when Steve said that your track looked like it landed and had nothing to do with the rest of the architecture, well, the rest of the architecture has nothing to do with itself. It's so, I see a horizontal, I don't know whether that's terracotta or wood, I see curtain walls, I see gray metal, I see white stucco or precast. I mean, there's so much going on here that the building lacks character because it doesn't seem like it knows what it is. It also seems very detailless. You have no attitude towards heads or sills or jambs. This vertical siding of whatever the material is on the lower 2 floors there, I find this entry sequence really scary and sterile, and it seems to me the opposite of wellness. And if wellness is happiness, this just doesn't feel like a happy place, and the rents that the developer is going to have to charge is going to make nobody happy, because this is an incredibly inefficient plan. It's got way too much vertical circulation. I mean, you don't need double elevators in every bar or pod or whatever you want to call it, because you've got them linked together with all these connections and bridges. The outside contact area is, phenomenally high. Nobody can afford to build this. I mean, I hate putting reality on it.
No.
And working for developers is not the bulk of what I've done in my career, but if you're going to do a building like this, it needs a little bit of reality to it. I also really wonder why you put the single-loaded corridors to the outboard, to the streets, when it seems like those corridors could have provided a bit more privacy to the units they face inboard. And if you're going to live in an urban area like Noma, you want to have a sense of connection to the street, actually.
Can you talk a little bit more about where the building is connecting to the outside? I think you did a really interesting job of prioritizing places for movement and that idea of wellness, but I'm not seeing a strong connection to nature and the outdoors, and I think there's some moments here that maybe we haven't touched on yet. I'd love to hear more about those.
Yeah, in terms of nature, the strong push was in the central courtyard. From there, the edge is so close to the Union Station tracks to the east. There's more of a connection to the north and the northeast, and then getting onto this trail and then making your way up to the metro station that's to the north. But from there, I was trying to put as much as I could into the courtyards within the building itself, especially with the emphasis on that central core. And then from there, a little bit on the northeast, and then a little limited from that point.
I think we've talked a little bit about the geometry of the track on the top, and you can tell from the section that there's a place that you can be inside and then a place that you can be outside, and I liked the idea of pushing that a little bit more, and maybe that whole top piece isn't all outdoors. Maybe there's moments of inside and moments of outside. I could imagine that top space being really lovely to have a drink at the top.
Yeah.
And, it might be nice if there was some vegetation up there or shading or something to make moments of that top track space be a little bit different. I think your intention was that it was maybe all exercise space, but I think that's a really big track. Like that oval up there is pretty large. Yeah. So I think there might be moments to break it up and differentiate it a little bit, like we were talking about earlier.
Sort of the NASCAR running.
Yeah. You don't want to get on anyone's way.
It's fun because you imagine it being energized to the point where it will levitate and float away. Because it needs some attachment to the building. Look, modern architecture is grounded in ideas of wellness, right? The early modernists were concerned about the unhealthy life of cities and buildings. And so the Villa Savoye, as you know, is organized really around walking up and down ramps, showing, as Steve mentioned, architectural elements that deal with movement. Could you talk a little bit about the units themselves and how they are helpful in your view?
Yeah. So again, when it came to this part here, the orientation was having these crevices being open for light to come through. When it came to the units, it was more so that they would be more compact and efficient. So there isn't additional space for these activities within the units themselves, but if they're more compact, then it would push the residents to use these spaces outdoor or anywhere else within the city. So yeah, we had gone over that I do have some of the duplex apartment floors that are 2 stories, and those are the ideal for this scheme. I think they're more effective in these beliefs when it comes to wellness than just the flats and the typical multi-bedroom. But yeah, again, just some of these units, more of an L plan, so it's a double height space from the living room up into the bedrooms that are above on the second floor to bring light and air.
Well, the use of 2-story units and not having circulation on every floor is something that might inoculate you against the earlier criticism about the single-loaded corridors.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you know Peabody Terrace by Jose Lucer in Cambridge, which does this, and of course the Unité d'Habitation, which allows through units by not having circulation on every floor. It's something you look at.
But you do have circulation
What you have.
by floors as well.
He has that.
Yeah, I do have.
I don't see any plans that don't have corridors on them.
Oh, they're not.
Yeah, these are open balconies on the upper floor.
Partially because you're not rendering the color to show that it's part of the unit somehow.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a lighter blue or something, but it appears like a corridor.
Yeah.
My point is simply that in a thesis related to wellness, unit design is really a critical aspect that
Yeah.
you've thought about, but it doesn't come across in the presentation.
Even like a blow-up section or something.
I just wanted to go back to the comments about the facades, and it relates a little bit to what I was saying about the kind of the orientation. I think Stephen earlier said it was kind of additive looking. I actually think it's not additive. It's fractured and kind of broken to pieces, and I find that distracting from the big idea of the track. And I really, it makes me think of the shop building in New York, the American Copper Building, which it's basically 2 towers and there's this bridge that slams across it. And so I really want the facades to be much simpler, edited, very clean, and then have this bridge or have this band. Then if the band was absolutely totally different, then it would make a little bit more sense because it would have this relationship of A, B. I also thought, what if it wasn't quite on the top? Like, what if it was down and literally created this cut in the vertical section of the building? And the other thing I was thinking of, when I was thinking about the relationship to the bike trail, is could it start low and literally go up, and start low in the middle, kind of cut up. I don't know, but I really think the kind of editing, and this is something that I still, many years after my thesis have to think a lot about, is editing and trying to simplify And if you're gonna go for things like you talked about the courtyard, you know, you were saying that's where your kind of green space is. Well, it's not there, you know, it's not in the rendering. I want that to be like incredibly lush and very different. And then that made me start thinking, well, initially I said, what if it was a U-shaped building this way? Then I started thinking, what if it's a U-shaped building this way and your fitness center was actually out on First Street, cutting through, and then this green path like gathered the relationship to the bike trail. So anyway, just thinking about editing, trying not to make so many moves, and make it simpler so that the big idea is stronger.
Actually, more time to think.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of other ways to incorporate this running track into this building. And two thoughts come to mind. One is, if you look at your site plan over here on the western side of it, where it looks like it slightly mows out from the face of the building, I'm wondering if there's a way to actually take that mow and bring it all the way down as a big bay on the units. So that's where it grounds itself. And then that curve goes up and suddenly becomes this running track. The other thought is, what if there were more than one running tracks in this building? What if there were multiple floors? And I could actually get to my unit by walking around the running track. What if it was the circulation going to the units, so that I didn't have to go all the way up to the roof to run? If I want to get off on the third floor and walk around this thing, and there might be people running past me, so be it. It'll be the way that I get to my unit.
It's actually an option I experimented with. I was looking at tracks being on this interior courtyard at the different levels, and then it would be a shared space between the track and then the corridor, whether it's open or there's a division between the two.
And then just two more comments. One is, one reason to do the site study and these site plans is to let that site plan inform you about where the better rooms might be. Yeah. So for example, when I look at it, and I look at the upper left-hand corner, I have to imagine there's a great living room in that corner. Yeah. And then I look at the building plan, and it's a bedroom. It's a small bedroom. So I would want a wonderful living room in that corner. I think where it's better is on the inside of the main courtyard. Mm-hmm. Where you carve away that corner and get the living, dining, and kitchen, and then you work the bedrooms off of that. That to me relates to the site plan. Some of the other corners don't. And then just to follow up on a comment that's been made, if you look at the elevations themselves, I mean, the floor plan all the way through the side wings is the same, or fundamentally the same. But you have some really difficult joints in there. You've got this great band that comes in and wraps around and gets cut by glass. You get a balcony that spans over a couple of single windows and touching on large angle glass. I think all of that could have been coordinated better.
Yeah, I still go back to the word you used a million times, wellness. And there's just so much here that doesn't really support it. I'm looking at these very tiny horizontal windows in that brown part of your building. Looks more appropriate to a urban correctional facility than a wellness department. Other than your areas that are all glass, your solid void relationship doesn't seem to meet what people want these days. And your wellness courtyard just seems like a name only. I don't understand, you've got this bank and you've got what looks like a sloping grass panel with some arbitrary trees thrown in there, and then it's cut off from the rest of it by a fence. The only place you seem to have actually drawn it is in your site plan, and it's a cross of paths and green, but there's no sense of lushness. There's no sense of trying to bring nature into the project, really. You call it a wellness courtyard, but to me, it's just a courtyard at this point. And everybody's sort of talked about your units being fairly typical. One thing would be interesting is, rather than having this separate wellness core in the middle of it, what if you took the double-loaded corridors and made them wider and pushed everything together and put exercise equipment in the corridor? Really bring it together. Have, rather than little doors into the units, have big, glass doors that look out into the equipment. It just, you've got a fairly typical housing type when you get right down to it, with these wellness features sprinkled in, but I'm not sure it makes for a wellness complex that you're trying to do. I mean, I understand what you're trying to do, but you're not quite there yet.
Well, I'm going to bring the comments to a close. I think, Brandon, you chose it's a difficult thesis to bring together a program like housing in a complex part of the city and then combine it with this idea of how to live a well life. And putting those different program components together, it's challenging. Housing is not easy by itself. I think the jurors brought up some good comments about ways to think about the site, maybe some of the complexity issues on the skin of the building to think about as you leave the academy and go into the profession. So thanks for bringing this project to us.